Alright, welcome to the B&E Slot Sport Eliminator build-up instructional video. I know I've made a few videos online, but I want to try and get a little bit more in-depth here as far as how I actually build things. The Eliminator comes in a solid piece. I actually cut one piece off here. So you're going to have to take a thin Dremel disc with your Dremel tool. I like these quick release ones. And you very carefully cut off all the parts from the tree. Before you do that though, take some isopropyl alcohol and a Scotch-Brite pad. I have alcohol on this, and I basically wipe off the chassis for starters because we put a rust inhibitor on all of our chassis. So you want to get rid of that so you have better solder adhesion. And the Scotch-Brite basically is going to give you something a little bit better to adhere to. It gives you a nice surface to have your solder adhesion. Okay. We do have two brackets on our new Eliminator. One's for 16Ds if you want to go that route. Otherwise, this one here with the slots, that one is more for FK style motors, Falcon motors, home set motors, stuff like that. That's the one that I primarily use for the racing that we do. B&E, the Eliminator basically comes with adjustable height bushing holes for the front and rear. We actually use a solid axle up front. There are no bushings. You can either solder in an 1/8 inch axle or you can put a 3/32 axle in the tube. In the back, I primarily use Champion 3/16 OD by 1/8 inch ID bushings. I believe Slick 7 and a couple other companies make pretty decent bushings that will fit that option. If you want to build something totally different for your own thing, you can use your standard 3/32 ball bearings or whatever's out there on the market. So this is our jig. This is actually a new one that I have not used, just to kind of show you. Everything is engraved, all your different wheelbases. My prototype's a little different, which is the one I'm working off of because I've already used it a bunch of times. But these are a little bit further in than the chassis fixture that I'm using. I decided to move them further in because it worked out better with the chassis blocks. And you also have some pins where you can set your front tire width when you're actually using solder-on collars or like a Bardos threaded axle. You can figure out how to even it up. It's basically tapped, so you can hold the chassis down with our special holders. That also works as a good body pinning fixture. So we're going to go ahead and move this stuff off to the side, and I'm going to grab the chassis that I already kind of cut and prepped and set on the jig block. Alright, so this is your basic jig block. What I'm going to do is use our jig wheels, which I'm going to try and set this up so that all of our heights are at 950 tire for 050 clearance in the back, 950 tire 032 clearance up front. These jig blocks, you'll see on them, I'll try to show you a little bit later, that there are 4 different dimensions on them. There's 950, 1 inch, 890, and 975, which are common hard body sizes. And the front blocks are a little bit different. They're for a 3/32 axle. If you wanted to do 1/8 inch axle, you'd have to figure out something a little bit different up front. But this is pretty much how we build our cars. So I went ahead and I assembled everything in the rear. The whole back end basically goes together where you have side uprights. Okay, you're going to cut those out. And then there's the motor brackets, which I set off to the side, and then there's a brace that holds it all together. So you're going to have to go ahead and get yourself some decent diamond burrs or parts from your hardware store, Dremel apartment, and you want to go ahead and clean up the chassis, all the little burrs and stuff that's on there, so that everything fits really nice. So usually I'm all by myself building, and I just got music blasting and I don't have to talk. So I don't know how this is going to go. But I did go ahead and lock everything in. You saw the threaded holes on our jig. I actually have some attachments that have holes in them. That's for pinning bodies later on. But you can actually turn these Phillips head guys, and you can loosen them and tighten them. And that actually holds your chassis in place once you got it centered. You don't want to kill it. You just want to make sure that chassis lays nice and flat. Okay, I went ahead and fit up the front end of the chassis. Basically, there are some pins, and then there's a spacer that brings up your guide tongue a little bit higher. We're going to go ahead and solder that in. All this stuff is locked down. I did go ahead and take the liberty to pre-solder up those front uprights just before we got started, just because it is a little bit tight to get in there. We also got a wire retainer. We're going to solder that in. And then one other option that you can do, you can assemble this chassis completely without wire, but I did add some 063 rails because later on this chassis is going to be a little bit more of a blueprinted special. I'm going to end up doing some cuts there that's going to provide a little bit more bite to the chassis. So the chassis will basically be held together by these two rails and then these two rails that are integral to the chassis cut. All right, so soldering. All right, so let's talk about soldering here. I like the Hakko FX 601 with a 1/4-inch chisel tip. You want to find a decent quality acid flux. I usually fill up just a little cap on my workbench here, and I like to use the dollar store brushes rather than squeezing it out of a bottle. It just turns into a big mess. With the brush, I can really kind of control where I'm applying that acid flux, and it does a little bit cleaner job. So I'm probably going to start on the front end of this car. So I just don't like to have a big acidy mess. I kind of wear gloves. Just, you know, it's kind of bad stuff. Now you can see that there's some pins. I went ahead and ground these pins down a little bit. I'm happy with that guide flag position, but those pins fit in real nice. There's a spacer underneath there that elevates that guide tongue just a little bit. So that's that. As far as solder, I like a little bit thicker solder. On a lot of the Eurosport stuff I used to use silver solder only, silver bearing solder. I actually have found with this particular chassis, being that it's thicker metal and the heat transfer that you need, I like working with just regular 60-40 solder. We just kind of lay it on there real nice, make sure your joints are good, and the 60-40 solder does a pretty decent job. Now, I'm not the best builder in the world, but I think I'm going to be able to talk you through how I do things. First thing I want to do is go ahead and get a little bit of solder on the tip of my iron. Okay. And then I am just going to go ahead and get my chassis nice and hot. Now, you don't want to move back and forth or anything like that. You want good heat transfer. And you want that solder to just kind of flow in there. So we're going to get that guy locked in place. Now, if you have a hard time flowing, you just add a little bit of acid flux, and then you add a little more solder. I have not soldered that front axle in yet because sometimes I like to move it out of the way if I'm in a bad mood. I'm going to lay down a little bit more acid flux here. Okay. I don't go crazy. Now I'm making sure I'm getting really good heat transfer. That way that solder and that flux is flowing underneath the guide tongue and it is soldered to the base of that chassis. So. Okay. Got my little guy strolling in here talking to me, so hopefully it's not too big of a distraction. You see how I just got real nice solder flow. I can see that it's flowing in there. I don't know how well it's flowing in there. Just get real good solder flow. And then I like to go ahead and get some on top of the guide tongue. Get it to flow down in those pinholes. Nothing really complicated. You just use a really good acid flux and a hot iron. You know, I happen to believe that an iron can be too hot, but some people will tell you differently. You can never have enough heat. So this iron just happens to work really nice on spring steel. Okay. Now I did kind of tap those pins down in there. So, you know, it might look like they're a little bit bent, but sometimes I get a little bit restless. And I just want to hammer it home. Alright, so our guide tongue is soldered in. While we're there, you want to just kind of go ahead and go back and touch everything. We'll go ahead and get some solder on that lead wire retainer. Go ahead and get some acid flux in there. Go ahead and get a little more solder loaded on my tip. And something like that, a part like that, you just want to gently hit it. You know, you just get on it, you stay on it a little bit. See, I didn't do a whole lot of moving around or anything. I just laid some heat in there, and I just got it hot, and the solder flowed down in the slot. So I got my jig blocks up front. I'm going to go ahead and lock that front axle in. I do have a better method of locking this front axle in with some collars and stuff like that, but I was just trying to get the video rolling. So we're going to go ahead, get that set where I want. We're going to go ahead. This is just going to be a straight axle because what I got is a Bardos threaded axle up on front. So it actually is held on, the wheels are held on with spacers and nuts. So we're going to go one side at a time. Take our time, make sure we don't move things around. I like to hold the jig blocks down, because if you don't hold those down, if you got a heavy hand like me, it's pretty easy to push things out of place. So I'm soldering the axle and the collar. I'm going to go ahead and do the collar on the other side too. That way, when someone's putting me into the wall, I'm a little less worried about my front end coming loose. Okay, so that's that. Sometimes you got to have a little tire wrench nearby, and you just go ahead and prod things back in place, because when you're moving things around. Alright, we're going to go ahead and do the other side. See how that's kind of moving around on me just by brushing it? Just means I got to pay attention when I'm soldering it that I don't push it the way that I don't want it to go. All those are our 332 solder collars. You can use an 1/8 inch brass tube up there if you want. But, you know, it's just adding a little more weight and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and just solder that in. I do have a pretty good exhaust fan in there, so before anybody chews me out and says I got my little kid in here inhaling fumes, we're in good shape here. So I got a nice professional exhaust system here. Alright, so front end's done. Alright, so we got the front end done. I like to use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol as I'm going and just kind of try and neutralize the acid a little bit. Just kind of keeps the acid from attaching the plating on the chassis. Stops any kind of corrosion. One downside of spring steel, I mean, it's super durable material. But one downside is that it does like to rust if you just look at it funny. So we got that. Alright. So we're going to go ahead and move to the back end. And you can see as I was rolling things around, these bushings popped out. I'm just going to make sure my blocks stayed down. I'll go ahead and get my fingers on it. I'm going to get some acid flux. I'm going to do the bushings last. I'm going to go ahead and get the uprights all soldered in and the motor bracket and all that stuff. I go ahead and apply some gentle pressure because you just kind of touch it with that soldering iron and things like to move around. So I just do a little bit at a time. And you go ahead and you can put acid all over everything if you want. But the problem with that is it just turns into a big mess. You know, I like to keep things as clean as possible. So I'm just doing the uprights right now. That way if I bump that axle, it's no big deal. Got real good heat transfer with this iron. I'm cleaning my tip as I go too, just to keep whatever carbon buildup off the tip. That way I got real nice flow. You see, like, I'm not going crazy moving things back and forth. If you stop getting good flow, it means you just kind of burned up all your flux that was on the surface. Just go ahead and add some more flux. Okay. You see, I got good flow inside there. Okay, so that's that. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and move to, I'm going to solder up that upright, that top brace. All this stuff interlocks. If you look at the tree, all the pieces are made to interlock. I'm going to go ahead and just let the solder flow down in all the joints. And I'm watching it flow. I don't know how good it's getting there on camera. Go ahead and get that top joint real good. Okay. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and get that motor bracket soldered down to the base. And then we got some side joints, some uprights we got to solder. Back end of this car is pretty indestructible. It's a little bit different from the first generation Eliminator, but it fits up real nice. You know, you just got to pay attention, make sure everything's nice and square. Sometimes what I'll do actually is I will take an old motor and I will put it in there and make sure that everything is sitting nice and square. For this particular purpose, it's not really necessary. So, trying to do the best job I can for you guys. It's kind of tough because my kid wants dad time and he is throwing a shit fit in the other room.
We could kind of remove that.
But at least it's entertaining. No, I'll leave it in. It's entertaining to the real world. Gives them all something to talk about. So, just going ahead and getting solder, good solder flow in all the joints. All right. So I did not do the bushing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and verify, make sure that my jig wheels, my blocks, my 950 blocks that set my elevation for my axle, did not move at all. Okay. And they all look good. And go ahead and get some acid flux on those bushings. Now our jig comes with all the components you see here, all the hardware, some stainless steel washers, stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and solder that bushing in. I just kind of get it on there. I'm super hot. I actually try to turn the bushing a little bit to get it to roll around. And I go ahead and get the backside and get underneath there. I feel real good about that. I haven't lost a bushing in a long time, but over time, if you're racing a car, you want to make sure that things aren't corroded. You got to replace bushings anyway. They do get worn out. I have a tendency of running like 2 seasons before I replace my bushings, and that's not really good practice. But you want to check things, because if you got something that's corroded in your box, or things break down over time with grease and you are taking hits during racing, just check all your solder joints from time to time. So I'm just kind of getting in there, getting that solder to flow in there front and back. That sucker is locked in. Alright, so basically all I got left is our mid rails there. I do have the body mounts, which I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Now I did clean these mid rails with Scotch-Brite and isopropyl alcohol ahead of time. Another thing you could do is pre-tin your wire. You could actually tin your wire by putting your hot soldering iron tip with solder, and you just drag it across a brand new piece of wire before you even cut it. Just going to get that solder to flow right in there. See, I'm not doing any crazy moving back and forth. I'm just getting real good heat transfer off my tip. I want to make sure everything stays laying flat. Things do have a tendency of moving around. So I'll need a little bit of acid flux there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a little more on the other side. Now, you can go crazy and you can polish your joints all down with different flapper wheels and stuff like that. Dremel makes all kinds of polishing tools so that when you're done, you can polish all this stuff. What I typically do when I'm complete with a chassis, first thing I do is clean my jig and my chassis with isopropyl alcohol. And then I give it a good scrubbing in the sink with some dish soap, maybe some Comet if I got some Comet laying around. That's real good. And then I go ahead and just throw it in a tumbler. I actually have a tumbler that polishes everything up real nice. All right, so we are that far. All our elevations are set. The main important parts of the chassis are pretty good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this off the jig. Okay. Everything should just slide out easy. If nothing slides out easy, then you know you got some issues. I just loosen these guys a little bit. Alright. Go ahead, and I got a nut on the top. The bottom is a socket head cap screw, so you can kind of lock that down. So we're going to go ahead and loosen that. And you'll see underneath the guide flag, before I solder the guide flag, I have some stainless steel washers. That's what actually sets the elevation of my guide tongue. Okay. So I'm taking that out. I'm going to end up dropping this back in there eventually. Let's go ahead and give it a wipe since I'm going to handle it. Move my jig off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and give this whole thing a wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol. Our chassis are nickel plated. Makes life a little easier for soldering. I'm just wiping all this stuff down. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm building this chassis the way I want it. I'm going to go back because the solder did not flow in there like I wanted it to. And I am actually going to cut these outer two rails so that we get a little bit more movement out of this chassis. Basically all that does is provide some more bite. And then once you have that bite, if you have too much bite, we offer a couple different combinations of tires. If you have too much bite, the other thing you can do is just throw a little bit of tape on the bottom of the chassis, and that'll tighten it back up again. Okay. With any power tool, you just don't force it, you know? Very gently cut it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hit this guy from the bottom side, just because it did not flow in there. A little distracted with a screaming kid in the other room. We're going to get this done. He just wants to hang out with his family is all, you know? Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and lay some solder in there. I'm just going to hit all this just to kind of clean it up. What I'm going to do is take a flapper wheel in a little bit and just kind of clean those joints up a little bit. Okay. Everything looks nice. It's got the movement that I want. Alright, so that's that. So that's that part. I'm going to go ahead and knock these two pieces of brass. So you see I got a little bit of a burr on that body mount still. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the bottoms of those with just the edge of my disc. I'm not really cutting anything off. I'm just gently grinding. The same thing on the front. So now you have slots for different widths. I know where I want to go, but your particular body, you want to figure out where you want to be with that. Okay. Just kind of showing you how simple this is. These bottoms look pretty clean, but I'm going to give it a little love anyway. Okay, everything fits real decent. All right, so you can lock these in with pin tubes. I'm not going to mess around with all that. I actually like to stick some pin tube in there. I'm basically just going to solder these in place. I just hold it with my finger and make sure it's square. And I go ahead and I only solder it. I basically only solder it where the chassis slots are. Go ahead and get a little solder on the tip. So you see I've put down acid flux first, like anything else. I'll just go ahead and get on it and I'm off. I made sure that it flowed down there real nice. I'm pretty happy with how square this is. You know, experienced builder get through this chassis in about 30 minutes. It takes me about 5 minutes to get everything off the tree. You know, I'm talking here, which I normally am not sitting here talking to myself when I'm doing this. So I just kind of burn right through it. You know, and there's really no, as long as you do a decent job of soldering, really no reason to do any additional bracing or anything like that. It's 40 thou spring steel. It's going to stay together pretty well over time. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I am going to do some 050 stainless steel pin tube. Usually I use 063 brass pin tube. And what I actually do is I take some 025 wire and I bend my own U-bends in the provided holes. I'm just going to kind of go ahead and cut it a little bit long. Okay. Doing the stainless thing. Okay. Just going to go ahead and get that in there. And I stick it out past. You can, for hard body racing, you can protrude this out past the body if you want to. But I actually been cutting things flush and then bending some 025 wires, which I will show you in a little bit. Alright, so we're going to use a little bit of flux here. I solder it on the inside of the body upright, the mount upright. Because I don't want like a big blob of solder where the body's going to sit and it kind of affects the way that the body slides for me and everything else. Pretty happy with it. I like to use a piece of Scotch-Brite too. Because a lot of times on my own cars I don't even throw them in the tumbler. I just kind of Scotch-Brite them and then I get ready to go here. So you'll see that there's some heat marks, some distortion of the plating as you're soldering. That'll all go away with some polish. Okay, so that's the bottom of that. So another thing that I like to use is a flapper wheel, which I forgot to pull out. I'll pull that out in a second. You got various, there's sanding wheels, there's flapper wheels. I like this quick disconnect system by Dremel. This will kind of knock down the solder joints, just kind of clean them up a little bit. There are some better things out there, I just don't happen to have them right now. So, but it'll give you an idea of things you can do to polish it up. It actually kind of knocks down the solder joint. Once I throw it in the tumbler, that's really going to clean things up real nice for me. So now if you're not going to tumble this, I recommend highly that you go to the sink and you use some Comet and you scrub this thing like heck with a toothbrush, because you want to get all that acid flux off the chassis entirely, because what's going to happen is if you don't get this chassis off, it's going to basically, if you don't get it all clean, it's going to want to rust over time. But there's all kinds of different polishing compounds out there. Basically what I'm going to do is whip this thing in the tumbler and it's done. And then the next step is going to be turning it into a roller, adding all the bits that make it go. Anyway, I was a little bit distracted. Kind of tough talking through all this stuff because usually I've just got the music jamming. But that's the gist of it. Hope you all have a good night. It's not that hard to do. Any questions, you can contact me on www.beslotsport.com.